Hi, welcome to Aussie REAPER Hub. My name's Tim Ingalls and I will be hosting you through a series of videos on the philosophy of mixing in Reaper as opposed to your usual, tips or tricks. I'm not here to disparage tips videos and those sorts of things, top 10s and top 5s and all that stuff. There is a place for those, and I learnt a number of the techniques that I use off those videos. So, there is a place for them, but I would like to dive deeper into the philosophy behind mixed decisions in Reaper. And in that sense, they're not just Reaper specific videos that I'll be making, but I am using Reaper as my DAW. So my focus will be on how to do these things in Reaper. My first video today is why I switched to Reaper in 2024. This video is not a DAW wall video or a comparison of Reaper to Pro Tools or Logic Pro or Cubase or insert your favourite DAW here. The DAW formerly known as Studio One, which has now become Fender Studio Pro version 8. Every DAW, if it suits your workflow, fantastic. Go with that DAW. In terms of Reaper, this is just a video about why I actually switched to Reaper. One of the things I've discovered when dealing with Reaper users is I tend to liken Reaper users to evangelists, if you like. We tend to say, hey, check out Reaper because these are what the things that it does. And the people will often open Reaper, and I'll get to all this later on, but people will often open Reaper and think, oh, this is dreary, this is very boring, looks like Windows 98 is one I hear a lot. But what you'll discover, hopefully in this video, is that there are hidden elements of Reaper that you just don't find in other DAWs. So I'm not here to bash Pro Tools or anyone's choices of DAW. I'd never do that. Like I say, if it suits your workflow, it's the right DAW for you. Simple. This is more one engineer's story about why I switched and why I stayed. And the video itself is aimed at people who are feeling a little bit boxed in by their current choice of DAW and who are looking at maybe a more efficient or more user-friendly way of dealing with their workflow when it comes to production or mixing or even mastering. So I studied audio engineering at JMC Academy in South Melbourne, and we use Pro Tools because it was the industry standard. More often than not, if you go into a recording studio, you will find that they use Pro Tools, and that's fine. So when we learnt the Pro Tools workflows, I got quite proficient in those, and I was able to find my way around Pro Tools pretty well. I'd say I was probably on par with the majority of your top level producers, recording engineers, mix engineers, those sorts of things, in terms of how I was using Pro Tools. Maybe not as quick yet as some of them, but heading that way. And I genuinely liked the software. I enjoyed using Pro Tools. I didn't think that there were any real major drawbacks with it. I felt that I was able to work efficiently and effectively in Pro Tools. I found that it was a powerful, capable and professional program for recording, for mixing. But I did start to see little chinks in the armour that I'll come to a little bit later on. But suffice to say, the problem wasn't the DAW itself. The problem was the way I had to pay for it. It was the subscription model, or what I would call the subscription problem. You see, Pro Tools was costing me over $50 a month Australian, so that's the $39.99 plan US for Pro Tools Studio. Like I say, it was a great platform, but $50 a month, it was adding up real fast, and more to the point, coming around real fast. So I felt like I just paid a subscription and I had another one coming up, and so as a student and a freelancer, paying $50 a month for Pro Tools was becoming somewhat prohibitive financially and mentally as well. The real stress wasn't the cost itself, it was the lockout risk. Pro Tools has a 5-day grace period. After that grace period has expired, you are locked out of the software and you therefore can't do any work. So what I was finding was that if I missed a payment and I was more than 5 days from being able to fix that payment, I was going to struggle with being able to open projects and being able to do work, whether that was work for my studies or actual client work. But what was happening was creativity, the flow of creativity was blocked by what you call admin. I hadn't paid, so therefore I couldn't work. Therefore my creativity was stifled. So, regardless of what I was trying to do in Pro Tools, that issue that I was having then was one of restriction. So what I needed was a professional door without the anxiety, without the potential of being locked out, and without the financial stress that came along. So when I discovered Reaper, the first thing I noticed was that the price gave me freedom. What I mean by that is that Reaper has a very generous evaluation model. So they give you 60 days to evaluate Reaper for free, and then you are invited to pay the fee for Reaper. And I'll get to the fee in a moment because it was mind-blowing compared to what I was already paying. But the beauty of the philosophy behind the evaluation model was that if you got to the end of your 60 days and for some reason you couldn't pay for Reaper at that stage, all you'd get is a 5-second nag screen when you open Reaper saying, hey, your evaluation period's finished, and an invitation to purchase Reaper. The functionality was not throttled. You could do everything with that version of Reaper that you can do with the paid version of Reaper. You weren't locked out of your sessions. You could work in the sessions. You just had to wait 5 seconds at the beginning and click still evaluating. And it was a philosophy of trust that I found incredibly endearing in a system where you're restricted by iLocks and things like that, where, subscription models, oh, you haven't paid and it's been 5 days, so we're cutting you off until you can give us more money. And I have no issue with people asking for subscriptions and things like that. Whatever works for you, more power to you. But I love the way Reaper says, no, we trust you. We trust that you're doing this the right way. So we often hear about what Reaper's fee is. It's what they call a one-time license fee of $60. Now, that's a little bit misguided, I think, because the $60 license fee will give you 2 full iterations of Reaper. So for me, for example, I was evaluating Reaper during 6.8 and after, and Reaper 7 came out, and I knew that I was going to stick with Reaper. I still had about 25 days or something left on my evaluation. So I'd been evaluating for, about 35, 40 days, thereabouts, out of the 60. And I had plenty of time left on my evaluation, but I knew that I was going to pay for Reaper. So when Reaper 7 came out, I made the purchase. That $60 US for me was around about $95 Australian. And that will last me from Reaper 7.0 up until Reaper 8.99. So when Reaper 9 comes out, I need to repurchase a license. If I'm still using Reaper as a home studio, earning less than $20,000 a year US, so I could tell you what that is in Australian, it's about 1.5. So yeah, so call it 35,000 thereabouts Australian that I'm earning in my home studio, I'm still considered a personal Reaper user. So I'm only paying, for me, 95, which is in American dollars $60, again at Reaper 9. Reaper 7 came out around 18 months ago, and we're up to Reaper 7.59, I think, now. So let's have a look at that, actually. Oh, that's actually not visible in that. Alrighty. Yeah, Reaper 7.59. So what's really interesting about that is in about 18 months we've gone through just over halfway through Reaper 7. So we're looking at around about 4 years is the normal time, 4 to 5 years for you to get through 2 iterations of Reaper. So what we have there, even though it's not a one-time fee in the sense of you only pay once and you never pay again, you're only paying once every 4 to 5 years. So the reality, as a comparison of what I'd be paying in that period, for me to be paying $95 for Reaper in the same time period, I'm paying $2,400 to $3,600 Australian. So it's a no-brainer in terms of cost. And the beautiful thing is with Reaper is I can actually put that money back into learning and getting better at my craft. So while I may have come to Reaper for the price, I soon discovered a range of other things that just had me going, wait, what? How does a DAW that you pay $95 for do all of this? This is incredible. The thing that blew me away the most, I think, was the portability. When I recorded my album, I did that as part of my final assessment for my degree at JMC Academy. So my bachelor was in creative technologies, audio engineering and sound production, and my final assessment was my own album. It was meant to be another one, but before we got to go into the studio, the band that I was going to record split up, which, you know, happens. And I had some demos ready, so I spoke to my lecturers, said, what do you think? And they said, yep, do that. So I got some of my fellow students to come in and help me out. The majority of it was recorded at the Bass Recording Studios in South Melbourne. The rest of it was at JMC Academy in their studios. So Studio B with the C24 now has an S6, I think, if I'm not mistaken. That's at least what they were going to do. And in Studio A with the magnificent SSL Duality 48 channel mixing console, which, oh my goodness, that was so much fun to work on. But anyway, I digress. One of the things I discovered was recording tracks into the system at JMC Academy and the bass wasn't as straightforward as bringing it home and just plugging it in to my Pro Tools sessions at home, especially when one of the people helping me out with a particular vocal session, and we recorded tapes of a vocal that I would later comp. He actually worked in Reaper and used the Reaper technique for recording takes, not fully realizing that Pro Tools did things a bit differently. And so what happened was I got home and I was able to fix everything up, but it took me 2 to 3 hours to find all of these tracks and arrange them in a way that I could then go and comp them in Pro Tools. And I ran into a number of things like that, where taking sessions from home to the studio ran into issues and vice versa. Reaper can run as its own portable install. So what I mean by that is when I had to use Pro Tools, I would have to take the project off the hard drive I'd taken with me and put it onto the computer that I was working on at the studio. If I'm using Reaper, I can take a USB stick or an SSD drive with the session already set up. I may need to adjust the outputs when I get to the studio, which is as easy as opening the routing matrix, clicking and dragging down the screen, or for you that way, I suppose, that way down the straight screen, and creating a matrix of connections saying that this track outputs to there, this track outputs to there, this track outputs to there, and so on and so forth. So I didn't have to drop the session from my memory stick, my thumb drive, whatever you want to call it. I don't have to drop it off that onto the computer in the studio. I can run it straight off the source media. So in other words, there's no double handling of projects and project files. It also means that I can take any Reaper stock plugins or other plugins that run on Reaper that don't use things like iLock, so any of their JS effects, anything from like Toucan or anything like that, give you these incredible plugins that you can use for free, by the way. I can take all of those with me if I need anything there. But normally I'll be just doing tracking and we'll record straight to the project session. Then I take that stick or that drive home, plug it into my computer, and I can run it from there. I don't have to double handle. And the beauty of that is if I want to use plugins that require iLock, like anything from UAD Spark or Slate All Access Pass, I can use those. But I don't have to worry about them not being found in the studio because my project file is set up that it doesn't actually look for those. And then all I do is when I get back, I click and scan for new plugins. So I've got the same shortcuts, the same layout, the same everything, same templates, everything that I want and that I use with Reaper at home, I've got with me in the studio without having to double handle anything and play, door calisthenics. I also don't have the issue that I had where I got into the studio and had missing files and things like that. And you're not tied to one place or location. Like I say, you can take it anywhere. You can take it with you and work with the same project that you have at home. Once you feel this freedom, well, at least like what I found, I can't speak for you, but once I felt this freedom, it was really hard to give it up and go back to doing it the old way. And please let me know in the comments if any other DAWs let you do that and just take a session and run it off the hard drive or off the memory stick, because that to me was the killer. I did accidentally forget to drop the Pro Tools session from the hard drive onto the computer one time at JMC, and I found myself a few minutes into it running into all sorts of trouble. So it's an issue that I wouldn't have and don't have with Reaper. One of the things you often hear about Reaper is the almost infinite customability. If you need to do something in Reaper, there's probably 3 ways at least to do it. And you can actually create your own workflow in Reaper and customize the workflow to work around you rather than you having to work around the workflow that the DAW implements upon you. So that is a real win for a lot of people. But I would just like to give you a little bit of a warning first about that, because the customizability can be a rabbit hole. What I mean by that is you can find yourself going down the path of trying to customize Reaper to do all sorts of things and find that it can do it and go, oh wow, isn't this incredible? And that is a massive strength of Reaper. But early on in its usage, I actually believe it's a bit of a trap. And I know I kind of fell into that trap myself, where I felt like I was chasing workflow hacks, and I will use that term, hacks, because I didn't know what I was doing, right? So I was chasing, all these different ways of molding Reaper to my workflow when I didn't know what my workflow fully was yet. And that's something that it distracts you from creativity. I'll be honest with you. So what I want to say to you here is if you're looking at Reaper as a potential DAW for you, the DAW itself is incredibly powerful. Ridiculously powerful. I've not come across anything like it. But my advice to you early on when using Reaper would be customize how it looks, not how it thinks, because you can do both. So what I'd like to say here is if you import a theme that you like and install that, which is so incredibly easy to do, you download the theme into a folder in your Reaper folder, you open that up and you drag that and you drop it onto your Reaper session, and Reaper adjusts and has that theme. It's unbelievable, and you can make it look like anything you want. You can make it look like Pro Tools if that's what you're coming from. You can make it look like Logic if that's what you're coming from. You can make it look like Cubase if that's what you're coming from. If you've suddenly been beamed down from the deck of the Starship Enterprise, you can make it look like that. I'm not being funny there. You can do that. There is a theme that makes it look like the Enterprise. Or you can stick with the default theme. The default theme in itself, I actually think, is fine. You can still color code. I think most doors will start with just a blank. When you open up a blank session and open up, let's say you open up 5 tracks, and there'll just be 5 grey tracks on the side of the screen, and you can then color code those tracks how you would like. Each door does it differently. It's a fairly simple thing to do, and you can do that in Reaper. So it's not always just drab and grey and boring, even though Reaper looks pretty bare bones at first. But the reason I'm saying all this is because you can adjust the paintwork without touching the engine. You understand? So leave the deep configuration for when you know more about what your workflow is going to be using this amazing door. Let's say, for example, you've come from another DAW and you've gone, it works mostly how I would like, but there are some things I wasn't sure that were useful. Well, Reaper will be able to do those. So you can come over to Reaper and you can actually make it work like the door that you were coming from. You can change keyboard shortcuts and mouse modifiers and things like that to make it do that. And then the things that you wanted in your previous door, you can actually make Reaper do. But I would still suggest get to know the DAW for a little while first. Sorry if it feels like I'm not making eye contact, by the way. I keep looking at the screen, not the camera. First video, so hopefully I'll get better at this as I go along. Why over-configuring too early can backfire is that early customization is based on what you think you want. As I mentioned before, if you haven't learnt the door yet, you haven't really learnt how you're going to work with it. So if you haven't learnt how you're going to work with it, you're not really going to know your workflow. So what happens is when you go and configure everything and start changing all sorts of bits and pieces in Reaper, 6 months later what you find is that your workflow's changed and the decisions that you made early on no longer fit with what you were trying to do when customizing the software to work how you want it to. So if you don't know your friction points yet, and that's okay not to know your friction points yet, but if you don't know your friction points, how do you know what changes you need to make to adapt to and overcome those friction points? Once you've been using the door for 6 months or so, you've got more of an idea of what it is you want to do with it and how you need to work with it. And those changes will make more sense into the future. But see, customization is a long-term strength when using Reaper. Reaper shines over time, not necessarily on day one. A lot of people do find they open it up and they go, oh my goodness, this is everything I've ever wanted. Other people open it up and go, I don't know what to do. Look at this action list. Look at everything in there. 3,000 odd actions. How do I know which one to choose? Right? So the thing with Reaper is that the more you get to know it, the more you understand how those things all work. And when you understand how those things work, then you can adapt them to your workflow. So after months of using it, you notice friction. Oh, hang on, I need to do it this way. I don't like doing it that way. I wish there was an easier way to do it. Well, guess what? There will be. Whether it's using scripts or keyboard shortcuts, using custom actions, things like that, you will be able to do some amazing things in Reaper. And those pain points, those friction points, will be dealt with and will be smoothed over. So while you've noticed the friction points after a month or after months, after a year, you don't just know that you have friction points, but you know why they are friction points, right? So early on, you'll discover friction points. After a little while, you'll understand that they are friction points. After a bit longer, you'll understand why they're friction points. And at that point there, Reaper becomes an unstoppable tool for you, because custom actions start solving very, very real problems that you're having. People will often say, Reaper doesn't do this off the cuff, but my DAW does. I can guarantee you Reaper will be able to do it. I think there's only one thing I've heard of that another DAW has that Reaper doesn't have, and I'm still not overly convinced, which is the FL Studio slide that they have in their MIDI piano roll. But I would be really, really surprised if someone in the Reaper community hasn't come up with a script that will do that. But, I said earlier on, I'm not here to make comparisons, and I'm not here to disparage any other DAWs, and I hope I've not come across as doing any of that. But all I'm trying to say is that Reaper is incredibly powerful, and if you need it to do something, there will be a script that can do it, or you can make one. It becomes personal, not generic. I think the thing to take away from that is that Reaper grows with you. Instead of you having to grow into Reaper, over time, it grows with you because you've understood your friction points and your pain points and everything like that. And you've understood why they are those things, and then you can go, right, I'm now adapting this to my workflow. I'm now adapting this to how I want to operate as a producer, or as a mix engineer, or as a recording engineer, or as all of the above. I mentioned earlier on the JS effects. These things are brilliant. The built-in JS effects, EQs, dynamics, and other utilities are extremely lightweight, so they don't bog down your CPU. I tried to do something the other day, and I just wanted to see how it worked. I put an instance of SSL 360 on every channel in my mix, and after about 40 or 50 channels, I had a lot of channels in the mix. After about 40 or 50 channels, my computer stopped. It ground to an absolute halt. When you use the JS effects and the built-in Reaper plugins, you don't get that because they're all text-based. They may not always look pretty, although, having said that, I mentioned before Toucan Studios. His effects look absolutely amazing, and he has emulations of hardware, whether that's synths or compressors or EQs or whatever. He has these emulations of these hardware pieces that he's gotten from the actual hardware themselves and created these plugins that you can use for free. They don't gunge up your system, and they work like an absolute charm. But because there's no heavy GUI with those, you don't have a lot of RAM or CPU being taken up. So your system resources stay fairly free. You don't have any licensing overhead. So there's no iLock involved or anything like that. All of the plugins come with Reaper and are used from the Reaper folder, not from some other third-party place that has to verify that you own them. These JS effects and Reaper stock plugins are perfect for gain staging and for routing, for metering, and for utility tasks, for dynamics and things like that. But you need to understand that it's function over flash. As someone who grew up in analog era studios with dials and knobs, not Niles and Dobbs, with dials and knobs, I find plugins that have dials and knobs I understand better than plugins that have just straight faders and things like that, because that's what I grew up with. So for me, the Toucan plugins are great, and I do find the Reaper plugins sometimes I have to get my head around. Don't confuse that with a weakness of the system or a weakness of the plugin, because they are incredibly powerful plugins for the very simplistic GUI that they have. I can't stress that enough. give the Reaper stock plugins a crack before you jump onto your third parties, because you'll be staggered by what they can do. So you might be wondering at this point, well, that's all well and good, but my computer isn't very fast and isn't very powerful. Well, let me give you a real-world performance here and tell you a bit about my actual computer that I'm using at the moment. Now, I am hoping to upgrade later this year to an i7, not an i9. i9s are incredibly powerful, but the way they run tends to be a little bit loud, and for an audio computer, you don't want that. Now, I'm happy for anyone in the comments to say, no, mate, you're wrong on that. All I'm saying is that from all the research I've done when looking into buying or building a new computer, the thing I kept coming up against was avoid i9s because they run hot and require extra fans, and extra fans means extra noise. My current system, I'm using an old i5. It's a 2017 to 2018 era computer that my mum bought, actually, just to do things like email and maybe look at videos on YouTube. So it's not a cutting edge computer. It wasn't a cutting edge computer at the time. It was a very low end of the spectrum when it was built. What's that, 8 or 9 years ago now? I have upgraded the RAM and the SSD. I upgraded the RAM from 8 to 16 gigabytes, and I upgraded the SSD from 200 to 500 gig, which is now almost full again. The life of an audio engineer, right? But my current specs are a an i5 CPU, 3200 gigahertz, 16 gig of RAM, and a 500 gig hard drive. Running Reaper, this computer is stable, responsive, and I'm not doing any constant troubleshooting. I did have that issue, like I said the other day, where I tried to load on a ridiculous amount of SSL 360 plugins and the system ground to a halt. Would that happen on my new computer that I'm going to build? Don't know. Won't know until I try it. But what I can tell you is if I just want to run sessions, this does it no problems. So if your computer is old and under-spec'd, don't stress about that, because Reaper will run and will do it well enough for you to be able to do anything you want on it using Reaper stock plugins and JS effects and things like that. So you don't have to jump into third-party things that might slow your system down. My point here is you probably don't need a new computer. Now, the caveat I'm putting on that is that in audio, there will always be bottlenecks. So if you want to avoid those bottlenecks, get yourself a decent computer. What I'm saying here is if you can't do that right at the moment, don't stress about that. This will help, this will work for you until you can afford to do that, or until you're in a position where you can get yourself a new system. So I want to talk now about why I stayed with Reaper. I didn't switch to Reaper because it was trendy. I switched out of necessity. Reaper for me was something that intrigued me, but it wasn't something that I really wanted to do until I got to the situation where I couldn't operate with Pro Tools and keep my sanity. So even though I ended up switching for the price, I stayed for the freedom, for the stability, for the control, and for the confidence that I get from using this incredible software. I found myself in a situation where I had no lockouts. The relief that that gave me, I can't put a high enough price on. Knowing that I can get up in the morning, open up a session and work on it, Reaper allows me that. My previous software didn't. And I don't have to shape the workflow around subscriptions. I don't have to shape my workflow around what some programming monkey decides a DAW has to do, you know. So I've got no problem with the programming monkeys doing that and saying, oh, here's how we're going to make it operate. But when you have the ability to go, nah, I don't like that bit, I'm going to change it, it's freedom that it's unmatched. So I mentioned a little bit about at the beginning about what Aussie Reaper Hub's about. Aussie Reaper Hub is not about doing more in Reaper. It's about doing what matters with purpose. So what do I mean by that? So I'm not going to just cram into your head all these different things. This is how you do this in Reaper. This is how you do that in Reaper. This is how you do the other thing in Reaper. This is how blah, 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 blah. There are plenty of videos out there that will show you how to do that. If you don't already know, let me point you in the direction of Kenny Joyer's Reaper Mania channel on YouTube and all his videos on Reaper.fm. My goodness, the amount of work that that bloke has put in, he is an absolute gem, right? And his knowledge is encyclopedic. Like I'm a blithering dullard compared to what Kenny Joyer knows about Reaper. Some others, Mike Robinson over at Let's Talk About Reaper. He's well worth checking out for his videos. X.E.L.O. at Learning Reaper. Another place where you can find some of the most incredible videos on how to do this thing and that thing in Reaper. Alejandro Hernandez is another beauty. He creates themes and scripts, and he also has some good videos on recording in Reaper. And John Tidy is another one who is just an absolute wealth of knowledge. He's a bit like Kenny in that his knowledge, his wealth, of, his depth of knowledge is almost encyclopedic. He does videos on, whenever there's an update for Reaper, he does videos on this is what the new updates introduced. He's incredible. And another one I discovered about a month or so ago, and he's very much worth checking out, especially if you're a beginner. No label, no producer, no limits. His name's Keith Livingston, and he's really well worth checking out. So I would suggest checking out all of those if you haven't already. You know, whether you have or not, welcome to Aussie Reaper Hub, and I hope that what I do here as a philosophy first teaching style is something that will gel with you, and if it doesn't, that's all cool too. You know, I know my teaching style is not going to be for everybody, but what I want to teach you is decisions over defaults. So, in other words, instead of teaching you 5 tips for doing this and number 3 will really surprise you, I want to teach you this is what you use and this is why you use it. So when you get into a situation where you go, hang on a minute, I need to do something here. Oh, hang on, I remember that using EQ in this way helps with this thing. I wonder if it'll help in this situation. So the whole idea of it is not to have a specific situation come at you, but it's to have a scenario where you go, I know what I need to do here because I've learnt why I need to do the things I need to do. And I want to teach understanding over memorizing. It's not about learning by rote how I did this, how I did it by doing this, I did it by doing this, I did it by doing this, I did it by doing this. It's learning again why you need to do it that way, and it's you suddenly go, oh, hang on a minute, you now understand. If you want to know where I've come up with this, look up a guy by the name of Dr. Justin Sung, S-U-N-G. He talks about learning methods and how creating learning scenarios help you to remember more about what you need to do. And that's kind of what I'm adapting into my teaching style and my own learning style as well. I have found it to be very good. So what's coming next for Aussie Reaper Hub? My next video will be a getting started with Reaper video. So that will be more of a tutorial type video on, you know, how to get started. Like I say though, those videos aren't the main focus of what I do with Reaper. So it won't be as long as this video. It'll be sort of 15 to 20 minutes. But in all honesty, I will love doing those videos because it helps to consolidate in my mind how everything works in Reaper even further. And that's another thing that Dr. Sung teaches, is one of the best ways to learn a subject is to teach it. So if you're out there thinking about starting your own channel on how to do things in Reaper, or anything for that matter, I can't emphasize enough, jump in, do it, get going with it, because what you'll learn from it will be absolutely staggering. And even if that's the only reason why you do it, then it's worked. My next long form video like this one will be next month, and that will be a Reaper philosophy video, how to think, not click. That's not the title, that's the general gist of what the video will be about. Again, thinking about what you do in Reaper with purpose. What is my purpose for making this EQ tweak? What is my purpose for using this compression setting? What is my purpose for adding this limiter? What is my, insert whatever it is you're trying to do. What is my purpose for doing that? Starting with the end in mind, all that sort of thing. And coming at your mixing from a philosophical standpoint rather than a conglomeration of tips, tricks and hacks, because you'll find that your mixing will go from here to here when you start thinking about it properly, as opposed to just going, oh, I saw a tutorial on that once. Again, I want to emphasize, no problem with tutorials. Tutorials are great and they have their place, but please learn how to think about Reaper and how it works. And lastly, I want to say about that, my goal is to give you structured, calm and intentional learning. So no hype. That's not how I roll. I just want to teach you in let's try a calm, structured and intentional manner. So let me just finish by saying that this is not about abandoning your DAW that you're currently using. It's about understanding why things work the way they do. If you're using a DAW at the moment, like I said at the start, that suits you and your workflow, keep doing that. Thank you for watching this far into the video. And this doesn't mean that you can't come back and watch more of these videos, even though they're Reaper specific, because I think you will find elements of what I teach that will transfer over into other DAWs as well. But if you're in a situation where you're feeling boxed in and you're feeling a bit underwhelmed by your current choice of engineering software, then let me strongly recommend Reaper and jump in and have a look at how it works for you. There are plenty of videos. Again, Kenny's got some, Mike has got some on how to install Reaper and how to get going with it. And also on my website there are some articles that will also walk you through doing that. But I would like to ask before I go, what DAW are you currently using? Also, why did you choose it? If you want to go a bit deeper, why have you stuck with it? If you're thinking about changing, yeah, you can add something to that effect as well. If you're incredibly happy with what you're using, comment on that as well. The more discussion we have, the better it is, and we'll learn from each other. So just as I close, I would like to ask you to please like, subscribe and leave a comment. And yeah, thank you for stopping by, and I hope to see you again for the next video, which will be in a couple of weeks. And yeah, again, thank you. Welcome to Aussie Reaper Hub. Oh, wow. Oh, that was fun. I wonder if anyone's stuck around like I always do with Mike Robinson's videos. I wonder if Mike stuck around. Yeah. Probably not, but that's all right. Anyway.